So we're here, 1201 Governor's Crime Commission building. About to walk inside, see what's going on. It's busy. We're already trying to. Yeah. Says ring a bell. Please use intercom to the right for access. See what we got going on here. What's that? Yeah.
Slave could run north or south, they could be a good chance of being caught and returned. If they ran west, they were lost. And the so-called Seminole Wars, black, and they had a better understanding of how to fight the colonists than the Indians did, because they'd seen it in Africa in the slave wars. Okay, but never, okay. More, in the decades after this 1711-1713 war, a portion of the Tuscarora, including the Catawba and the Cheraw, who had earlier migrated north to the Virginia-North Carolina border to escape South Carolina, migrated back. See, the Tuscarora War made northern North Carolina unsafe. They killed so many Indians in that war, 9-War war, that the Indians realized they can't stay there anymore. So the Catawba, the Cheraw migrated back down south to South Carolina. The Hallawasaponi and some of the remaining Tuscarora from the lower towns, from the towns that made war, moved east to Bertie County, where they thought they'd be safer. And the middle towns ran north to Pennsylvania and then to join the Iroquois. First to Pennsylvania, then to join the Iroquois. And the upper towns stayed where they were. The upper towns stayed where they were until a whole bunch of the people got disappointed with the leadership of a guy called King Blount, who sided with the colonists and fled north also to join the Iroquois. Okay, back to work. More specifically, the important history presented by the Hallawasaponi. The Hallawasaponi's own history in Wikipedia, with a range of scholarly citations, points out that the Hallawasaponi descend from the Tuscarora, Nansemond, and Saponi, and notes that during, quote, this is the Hallawasaponi's own history, they note that during the late 1600s, the Saponi undertook a political alliance with a culturally related Totoro or Tutelo, and together they comprised the Nassau Nation. After the Tuscarora War, the Saponi, by 1730, joined the Tuscarora in Bertie County and found protection with the Tuscarora before they moved about 30 miles back west to become the Halawa. The second, I'm skipping a bunch. The second major pressure on the Tuscarora in the late 1600s and early 1700s. Oh no, this is about slave catching. I can skip that. I've done it. The Upper Town Tuscarora did, back to the Tuscarora War. The Tuscarora that assaulted the colonists at New Bern were led by a man called King Hancock, the settler was called King Hancock, and a person called Cortom, C-O-R-T-O-M, who almost all the native wars in that era, were religious as well as. It's crucial to explain the difference. The difference is not easily. The Cherokee at one point marched out to war against the French settlers. It was 1758, I think. And when they did, when they got 20 or 30 miles out of town, the religious leader, the priest, the sachem, did some prayers and appeals to the Lord, and the Lord, their God, did some appeals and prayers to the God, and the God said, no, don't do it. So the priest leader said to the Cherokee, turn back, we can't go. And the Cherokee, it is such a tragedy, the Cherokee had to murder their own priest leader so they could continue to, because they had for their survival to fight the French colonists. See, the point of all this, the wars were religious. The Cherokee War, the Tuscarora War against the settlers was led not simply by King Hancock, but by this religious leader, Cortom. And that gives the Cherokee because those are the Cherokee whose survivors migrated to Robeson County, first to Bertie and then south down the fall line to Robeson County. And those are the Cherokees whose identity as Native people is at stake here. Once they had to leave Bertie County once the pressure on them got too severe. Okay. I want to shift to some. That's enough of the background to the Cherokee, to Tuscarora migrations. I want to shift to the present period. In 1967, when I began my 18 months of civil rights work in and mostly around Pembroke, I worked with several communities of Tuscarora Nation people then in Robeson County. I was particularly close to Mr. Vernon Locklear, the head of one such community, and several other Locklears who built a Tuscarora longhouse in the vicinity of Prospect. In 1980, I was taken by a man called Deese, I have his first name written down there, I forget it, to visit their longhouse in the vicinity of Prospect. And I was told by him and his clan mother that Wallace Mad Bear Anderson, a major New York Tuscarora leader of Tuscarora struggles, had come down twice to visit them. I mean, I knew, because I worked doing some background research for the Tuscarora, in their struggles with the government. So Wallace of Mad Bear Anderson was a major Tuscarora leader, and he came down to visit this longhouse. Wallace Anderson brought as a gift to the Robeson County Tuscarora and their longhouse a song and a prayer. It takes a serious knowledge of Native American culture to realize the importance of this. Unlike Western societies, where if you hear and learn a song, you can play it and sing it, and you can pray as you wish, however you wish, in many Eastern Native American societies, songs and prayers are sacred, are themselves sacred. The song is not just to the sacred, the song is itself sacred. The prayer is not just to the sacred, the prayer is itself sacred. Songs and prayers are gifted between kin, between clan members, between clan allies, and the recipient then shares the ownership and can legitimately sing and pray what has been gifted. In other words, you don't just learn a song and sing it. Wallace Mad Bear Anderson gave the Robeson County Tuscarora, the Tuscarora Nation of North Carolina, song and prayer. That was an incredibly special gift. And what it was, for one of the major leaders of the New York State Tuscarora to recognize the Robeson County Tuscarora Nation in this way by these gifts is crucial. It is also a contested position. I'm almost done. It is also a contested position. For the same reason the Carolina Cherokee strongly opposed Lumbee recognition and the federal recognition of every group represented here. For the same reason that the Cherokee oppose federal recognition, because underneath all the ideology, there's a fear that Lumbee recognition will deplete the federal funds that the Cherokee have enjoyed. I worked, when I was down here in 67, 68, I worked a couple of days a week as a consultant to something called the North Carolina Mobility Project, which was trying to move starving rural people, unemployed, because the farms were mechanizing then. They were trying to move unemployed rural people into jobs at the furniture factories, in trucking and whatever. And they hired me to go around to rural areas, particularly areas where Native people lived. So they sent me to Cherokee to see who could or should be moved to a city where there were more jobs. And I worked for them also, and I worked among them also when I was consulting to the War on Poverty, on Indian poverty. I was told directly by the Cherokee that they didn't want anybody else recognized because they didn't want to share their funds. It was too important to them. For the same reason, the New York Tuscarora have been seeking, they've been in court more than once seeking compensation for the lands that were taken from them without even the pretense of buying them, for the lands that were taken in northern North Carolina. So they're suing North Carolina and the federal government for not protecting their rights because they want to be paid for the lands that were stolen from them, with not just the treaties they took, but the dreams of the Indians that they would finally get some justice. And they took those several file cabinets that they had spent their days in the BIA researching and gathering the critical treaties together. They took those file cabinets on the way back to the Midwest and hid them in Tuscarora barns, Tuscarora tobacco barns. So if you ever want to talk about Native Americans trusting the Tuscarora, Native Americans accepting the Tuscarora, Native Americans partnering with their brothers, the North Carolina Tuscarora Nation, I can think of nothing more important than that. But unfortunately, it was betrayed by somebody who saw them unload the stuff, and the FBI grabbed it and took it back before the Indians could use it, before the Indians. What heart? I worked with those folks. It was such a heartbreak. People cried for days. Okay. One final point. One final point. As a historical anthropologist who has worked with the Indian peoples in Robeson County since 1967, I have spent a lot of time discussing with Native peoples and especially elders what is simplistically called oral history. It's one of the things I do. I do what's called oral history. What's called like this is much more properly understood as the cultural, moral, and social framework of Native lives and Native communities as their lives stretch from yesterday to tomorrow, guided by these so-called oral histories. In other words, what the Americans call oral history is actually the moral, ethical, and community principles for getting from yesterday to tomorrow. And that's how it lives in Indian communities. In this context, I have spent in recent years a lot of time talking now to the current Tuscarora chief, Leon Locklear, sitting back there, and before that to Mr. Vernon Locklear and the Deases who were in the Prospect Longhouse. And then years ago, I don't know if people know it, but years ago, I spent a lot of time talking with Lumbee elders, including especially old Mr. Jim Chavis from the St. Anna community, active since the 40s in Indian recognition, and I was dear and close friends with Mr. Bardo Clark and Miss Geraldine Clark, recognized as honored as elders by the Lumbee tribe, and my work doing organizing and voter registration in the 60s and 70s was supported by Dr. Martin Brooks, who, emotionally supported, intellectually, politically supported, not financially. The differences that emerged from these discussions, both with Tuscarora elders and Lumbee elders, differences especially in about how these two communities are lived by the ordinary people within them, are very substantial and very significant. This is especially so in the different ways families and kin groups and churches make community. Tuscarora Nation of North Carolina communities, rather more well up from below, from the ordinary people in the community, are what gives the community its force, its life, its dynamic. Tuscarora communities well up from below. Lumbee communities are much more about leadership, much more about leadership from the top down. I'm not saying one is better than the other. It's not my place to say this is right, this is wrong, this is better, this isn't better. I'm just saying they're different, so that you can go around it. When I did that year and a half of voter registration and civil rights organizing, I lived in Pembroke. I never organized in Pembroke. I organized out in the swamps because I was most concerned with the poor Indians. So I know these out-of-the-way communities tucked off the main road, tucked back up a little dirt road with a little cluster of houses or trailers or what, back in the woods, back out of view. I know these communities well. I still have friends. I still visit there. They're different. The Tuscarora communities are communities from below. The Lumbee communities are communities that are run from above. And so they may live in the same region, Tuscarora and Lumbee, but at the level of community life, they are quite different. Okay, thank you for listening to my testimony. The Tuscarora Nation clearly deserves state recognition just as much as any other state-recognized nation, and to say anything different, to say that they don't deserve state recognition any more than any of you, would be a breach of justice. I very much look forward to this group recommending recognition, and if I can provide any further information, I would be glad to work with you towards that goal. Thank you. I would like, if there are going to be questions from me, I would like Ms. Lowry to come up and join me so she can help me with that.
Dr. Sider, that goes back to Chair Lady, and she will decide how to move forward from there.
I'm sorry, what?
The Chair will decide how we go forward from where we
Okay,
are
but
now.
I'm going to need...
She will have her time. I think if we've got questions, it's just going to be about your research.
Okay, sure, but I need to maybe turn to her and ask her.
And Madam Chair, we still have 9 minutes remaining on Dr.
I
Sider's.
see that 9 minutes to Ms. Lowry for her testimony.
Questions?
Madam Chair.
No, they want to sit back where they belong. Can I shut
You take a seat.
Oh, I'm only 81 and a half. Oh, thank you.
At this time, though, we're totally dependent upon you to answer your questions
Yes, ma'am.
about
Yes, ma'am. I
your
don't think,
research.
after being married for several decades, I've been trained to do what I'm told.
I only want to say we respect and appreciate your research, but we're trying to get knowledge.
I'm trying to give it, and whatever. Okay, thank you. Thank you, thank you. All right, how can I help? Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to know if you were provided with any information
Microphone,
on...
microphone. Name,
My name is Connie Mitchell.
hold the button there. Pull the lights up.
It was on.
How do I turn the, oh, this is on, okay.
Okay, you should be good.
Am I good now? No.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Try one of the other ones. Go ahead.
Testing.
Take your time, just go ahead.
My name is Connie Mitchell. I'm with the Maharan Tribe. My question to you is, well, first of all, let me thank you for the information that you provided to us.
And let me say, I'm very glad to meet you, because one of the ways I got through graduate school was writing an early colonial history of the Maharan. So I'm delighted to meet you.
I'd love to read it sometime.
I don't know if I still have it. That was 1963 I wrote that.
I just wanted to know if you were provided with the deficiencies that the Tuscarora Nation...
No, I wasn't. I'd like to see it, and if you want my help responding to it, I'd be glad to do that. But let me, okay. All right, go ahead. Well, no, wait. Let me answer it a little differently than that. I'm sorry, I think a little slowly. I heard that the commission said at one point that the Tuscarora only organized in the 1980s. I heard that one early colonists in the U.S. and Americans, with a group that was capable of fighting back, in other words, one of these militarized confederacies, they made treaties with the smaller settlement Indians along the coast. They too said the land was terra nullius, we're just going to damn take it. And the justification they said, the justification they used for saying the land was empty was that they weren't organized politically. They didn't have a king, they didn't have a chief, they weren't politically organized, they lived like wild animals just off the forest, just gathering nuts and berries. That racist, and you've got to understand it's racist, that racist refusal to recognize that Native people could organize themselves politically in communities run by consensus, in communities run by their religion, they were as fully and as tightly organized as anybody with a king. You might even argue they were better organized than somebody. So to say that the Tuscarora weren't organized till 1980 is to fundamentally misunderstand Native organization outside of the militarized confederacies. I hope that answers your question. I hope that answers your question. After teaching for so many years, I know I go on too long. I'm sorry.
My name's Charles Richardson.
Excuse me, Commissioner. We're going to necessarily have to limit responses and questions, because if we continue the lengthy responses and questions, we'll be here until after the expiration date time today. So
Turn time up on.
I would say probably 3 minutes.
Okay.
Don't tell my wife that. She's been trying to shut me up since.
Yes, sir. A couple of questions again. My name's Charles Richardson. Mr. Sider, thank you for the information and your presentation. I noticed according to the internet, I was looking at it, you wrote several books, and you got one in particular that caught my eye. I read a little summary on living in Indian histories, and that was about the Lumbees.
And the Tuscarora.
Yeah, but the one you wrote in 1993 was about
The Lumbee.
Lumbee. And you redid pretty much the same name on the book in 2003, November. It was published. And with all the information I've seen on the internet regarding in reference to you've done several books and research on the Lumbee and Tuscarora over the years of the 60s up into through the 80s. Could you summarize a little bit about the research that you did on the Tuscarora Nation in that time period? I mean, did you write documentation book-wise or research papers regarding the Tuscarora Nation, North Carolina, from the 60s to the 80s?
I know, and I have my curriculum vitae, which is 9 pages long. I know that I gave several papers. It's hard to say. I gave several papers that talked about the Tuscarora. I was the keynote speaker at the Canadian Anthro Society. I was the keynote speaker at the Australian Anthropology Society. I wrote pages. Oh, I wrote pages of. I have 6 pages of papers I gave. I don't remember. I worked with, but I can't sort of say this one, that one, this one, that one. And many. I'm just now at the end of my life doing my collected essays. So I saved most of them from publication because I wanted to do in my collected essays.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Marva Welch. Thank you for being here, Dr. Sider. I just have 2 questions, and the first one is, you talked about a 4-line zone. So is that part of your research, or where did you reference that from?
That's part of my research, primarily my research from the first draft of this book, 93. The first draft of this book, I spent 21 years in the state archives of South Carolina and here in Raleigh and in New York and in D.C. doing the research for this book. So most of what I know, and I also worked in England in the Public Record Office because they have an extraordinary map collection. And I worked in the map collection of the New York Public Library. And most of my work was in Robinson in 67, 68 was with Native people who lived in trailers. I was most concerned. There were the people in Pembroke that the people out in the swamps called brick house Indians. The brick house Indians were taking care of themselves. They didn't need my help. I was working with the Indians. So I worked out in Alfordsville, and people took me. A man called John L. Locklear Jr., the Indian Pope, he called himself. He took me walking along the swamp. He said, this swamp used to be 1,500 feet wide. It's now an 8-foot channel. And I went, in fact, found the government records, and it was, in 1916, reduced from 1,500 feet wide to 8-foot channel. So, I mean, I've done the research on the swampiness of and it's in my book. I mean, this was a lifetime of work. This wasn't easy.
So I hear that you don't have a citing for that reference.
Me?
Yes.
Wait a second. Wait. When you say I don't have a citing for that reference, it could be you're saying it's not serious. I have been asked to do tenure and promotion reviews at Harvard University. That's in my CV. I am, by this time, with a lifetime of research in Native people, I am allowed to discover facts myself.
Dr. Sider, my name's Gladys.
Would you say that you've done as much research for the Tuscarora as you have the Lumbee tribe?
I can't really answer that question because my concerns were always with the Indian peoples, plural, of Robeson County. So I have worked, you know, doing research in the county on the Indian people. So yes and no. I mean, no, because there are more Lumbee than there are Tuscarora. I have spent more time talking to people that identify as Lumbee.
Before this goes to final determination.
You know, I gotta go back to the point that in registering, trying to register Indian people to vote, back in the days when their schools weren't properly funded, back in the days when they were, you know, I worked with a Lumbee when the rural people I worked with, the sheriffs used to wear 2 pairs of steel handcuffs on their waist, and they'd handcuff you with 1 pair and whip you in the face with the other. I have seen an enormous amount with my work with the American Indian Movement, with my work with poor Indians all across the nation, with my work up in Canada, still with Indians who commit suicide. I have seen an enormous amount of suffering of Native American people and have worked since the early 60s in trying to do something about it. I was concerned that the Tuscarora were being poorly treated by the subcommittee here, were being treated somewhat arrogantly, and I wanted to encourage them. I was encouraging them, go to court. Don't sit, take quietly for this, and that may have been out of place for me. It may have been wrong for me to do as an outsider, but the point is, you got to understand, if you've worked in Indian poverty as long as I have, the suffering you have seen in Native communities left me with a certain bit of maybe improper anger. Let's call it that way.
My comment or question goes back to something that has already been asked. The time that you were doing your research, my question is, and you talked about working for the Indian people as a whole, did any time in your research and working with the Tuscarora, the Lumbee, or LRDA as you put it, did you see separation there in any way in schooling, churching?
Yes. Yes. The answer is yes.
Okay.
The communities were different.
Your mic?
Oh, yes, I did see separation. And communities are different. And there's a very special...
If you don't understand what's happening here, we're here at the state building, government building, for state recognition. A recognition period. Don't matter to me if it's federal or state, for the Tuscarora people. All it is paper genocide. But it's very sad that my people's been here since the beginning of time, and we're still, 2019, still sitting here fighting for recognition.
Participation in or grants from sources or programs designated for Indians only. There is no mention of this in this petition. In summary, only criteria 1 appears to be met. However, the requirement that the members of the tribe to be 1/4 blood Indian has not been addressed in the petition. Please call if you need further help. Sincerely, A. Bruce Jones. The problem with this letter is this is not an official denial letter. It is a letter from the Recognition Committee outlining the deficiencies with the Drowning Creek, Tuscarora tribe of Drowning Creek. It's not official denial. In fact, nowhere have I received where the Commission, the North Carolina Commission of Indian Affairs, during this 1981 time frame, held a meeting in which the North Carolina Commission of Indian Affairs Board as a whole unanimously denied the Drowning Creek ban of Tuscarora. So your statement that the Drowning Creek Band of Tuscarora's petition was denied is inaccurate. Let's continue. January the 16th, 1990, the North Carolina Commission of Indian Affairs receives a petition from the state for state recognition from the Eno-Okanichi Indian Association. On December the 5th, 1991, the Recognition Committee decides to consult the State Office of Archaeology to. During this process of the Eno-Okanichi Association's petition, there derived a division in the petitioning group. The newly elected chief of the Okanichi-Banasaponi Nation. In spite of this division, the North Carolina Commission of Indian Affairs decides to move forward regardless of this division, and they vote to recognize the Okanichi-Banasaponi's name change and further their newly elected chief, Lawrence Dunmore. In another meeting held just 2 months later, the Recognition Committee meet again, and this time they deliver presentations to both the Eno-Okanichi Indian Association and the Okanichi-Banasaponi Nation. Two different leaderships. It is clear from the contested case findings of the Okanichi-Banasaponi Nation, after Administrative Law Judge Dolores O. Smith found, she also evaluated the Okanichi-Banasaponi's petition for state recognition. After an exhaustive analysis of state recognition procedures NCAC 15.0209, she finds that the Recognition Committee had numerous errors of misinterpretation of NCAC 15.0209. It was apparent from the start of the review of the Okanichi-Banasaponi Nation's petition that they were up against a commission that had already self-determined as a board that they did not meet the criteria outlined for state recognition, despite the positive conclusions of the State Office of Archaeology and Dr. Robert Daniels. This is a prominent example of a continuous refusal to recognize a distinct tribal nation, and this refusal continues to invade this process of state recognition. Despite the evidence the Tuscarora Nation of North Carolina has submitted to the North Carolina Commission of Indian Affairs beginning in 1981, until present day, the Tuscarora people are still rejected by this commission. Now, I'm sure by now you're all wondering what's the relevance of this discussion of the Okanichi-Banasaponi Nation's court case against the commission. Well, here's the North Carolina for official state recognition. I advised him that some 12 to 15 years ago, I briefly worked for the petitioner, the Tuscarora Nation of North Carolina, under a ANA-funded status clarification grant, and so would not be able to review the material in an official capacity to avoid any claims of bias for or against the petitioner. I did, however, agree to examine the material submitted in the historical narrative section and provide the Recognition Committee with my thoughts and opinions as an informed individual who has assisted other tribes in the process of state recognition in years past. I told Mr. Richardson that this was an unofficial review. I would require no compensation on the part of the Indian Commission, and that they would need to secure the services of another individual to review the petitioner's material in an official capacity. The Recognition Committee, even despite Mr. Forrest Hazel himself, thank you, Wendy, even despite Mr. Forrest Hazel stating this is an unofficial review, continue to use the unofficial review of Mr. Forrest Hazel in their deliberations of a rejection against the Tuscarora Nation of North Carolina petition. This is nothing more from Mr. Forrest Hazel than his thoughts and opinions. You used his thoughts and opinions to reject the Tuscarora Nation of North Carolina's petition. You did that, the recognition committee members. You were allocated additional funding in your 2018-19 budget for the purposes of hiring additional state recognition program personnel and being able to officially consult agencies to come in and review state petitions. I'm not sure exactly how much you were funded, how much you were allocated. Can someone give me the amount that was allocated? Does anyone have that number in your physical budget?
I think it was over 200,000.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, I remember now. Yeah, over 200,000. Let me continue. So here's what you did do. You officially hired a, quote, Eastern Band of Cherokee recognized genealogist who holds no national board certified genealogist license. Well, the hiring of the Eastern Band of Cherokee recognized genealogist is also problematic for several reasons. We decided to do a little digging in on Miss Anita Fingersmith's background, and since she has on her bio on the Association of Professional Genealogists, she says the following: Anita Fingersmith is the principal genealogist for Cherokee Genealogy Services, licensed by the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. We decided to call the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. Nowhere in Miss Anita Fingersmith's research background do we find her expertise extending beyond Eastern Cherokee records. Why is this a problem? Well, because the recognition committee used the conclusive genealogical findings of Miss Anita Fingersmith, someone whose expertise doesn't extend beyond Eastern Band of Cherokee manuscripts, to again support their recommendation of rejection against the Tuscarora Nation of North Carolina. Hopefully you're following me by now. Additionally, the hiring of the Eastern Band of Cherokee recognized genealogist Miss Anita Fingersmith is problematic because she's married to an Eastern Band of Cherokee enrolled member. Well, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. We all know how the Eastern Band of Cherokee feel about North Carolina tribes. The action of these 54 individuals began to set things in motion for them to politically, socially, and culturally organize with the end goal. Their end goal was to cultivate a collectively agreed upon tribal identity. They did that in spite of the fact that the tribal name that was agreed upon was not a collective census among the majority of the Indians of Robeson County. Let's dig a little deeper. You state that the Tuscarora Nation of North Carolina was organized in modern times. Let's talk about the Lumbee name. Now, Dr. Sider just told you and just gave you his background that he officially incorporated and organized the LRDA. The only thing he didn't tell you is that when he incorporated their papers, they were not the Lumbee Regional Development Association. They were the Regional Development Association. How can you argue that the Tuscarora Nation of North Carolina organized in modern times when the majority of the tribes represented here have names that were organized in modern times, incorporated in modern times? There's another discussion I want to have at this time, and this is related to something that was said, something that was very painful to hear on the Recognition Committee's teleconference calls. Ms. Shirley Freeman, you made the comment that if we were unsatisfied with the Lumbee Act of 1956, we should have done something about it like you guys did. I mean, you rallied together your people to come from under the jurisdiction of that Lumbee Act. You did. That's right. In fact, you hired Dale Dees from the Lumbee Legal Services to help you write to the solicitor's office and argue how you do not constitute the meaning of the Lumbee Act. And in doing that, you were able to come from under the jurisdiction of the Lumbee Act. Prior to that, they lumped you all together under the Lumbee Act and there was no distinction. You did that. You stated that we should have did that. Let me tell you what we did. My people, the Tuscarora people, have been fighting the Lumbee Act and its United States congressional hearings regarding Lowry history, Henry Berry Lowry. Alan Lowry's daughter, Cecilia Lowry, married a Manor, the ancestors of Lawrence Manor, who was federally acknowledged and certified as one half or more Indian blood, according to his genealogical ancestors' DNA and physical anthropology pursuant to the 1934 Indian Reorganization Act. Again, he won his federal lawsuit, Manor versus Morton, Lawrence Manor, against Roger C.B. Morton, Secretary, Department of Interior. All of this information.
I'm sorry for the quality of the video. I didn't even realize, or I didn't know that I was going to be able to record when I went in. I wasn't really ready for it, but I tried to record as much as I could. I know most of the time it's just pointing to the ceiling, but there's a lot of important information. I walked away with a lot of information, and so I wanted to keep that, preserve that, and share it with anybody else who wasn't able to be there and would just like to know more about it. It's been an ongoing battle for a long time. My people's been fighting this battle not 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, 70 years, not 100, 200. My bloodline's been fighting this battle since 1491, but we still here. We still fight. We ain't going nowhere. We ain't going anywhere.